All right, awesome, Joe. So we were just chatting a little bit about your early childhood and homeschool up till 10. So why don't you talk to us a little bit about the transition away from homeschool and what came after fifth grade?
Yeah, so this could be a really long discussion, but the the long and short of it is that my family saw it wise to separate from that community, from that environment. There was a lot of controversy and conflict that ultimately meant we had to leave.
Yeah.
And this might sound kind of nuts. I don't know, but we had to leave at 3 in the morning. My family, I distinctly remember the movers showing up around 10 p.m. and starting to get us all packed up into a vehicle, and the movers having a discussion with my parents about whether or not we could take our grandfather clock because it was so complicated, and I think we ended up having to leave it there. So
Mm.
that was like the urgency that we had to leave, and we moved to Northern Illinois because we were kind of starting over. My family had poured all of their resources into the house that we lived in Wisconsin. It was a very large house, I think like 4,000 square feet. It was built for a family with 8 kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we left all that. My dad and I have talked about it recently, and essentially he said, any amount of generational wealth that our family had accrued stayed in Wisconsin. And shortly after that, while we were all, I think, still kind of reeling from that change, I remember my dad kind of calling us all into his bedroom and saying, "What would you guys think about going to school? Going to public school." We were so excited. Um, Again, reflecting back on it, I think that there was probably an element of needing help, needing a place to be able to send kids, for some amount of time during the day. But also because we had left behind all those resources, all those relationships, we also needed a lot of assistance, support. There was a year straight that I remember only having rice and beans in our pantry. And the only meals that my siblings and I got besides were like the free and reduced lunches at school. So I think that motivated a lot of that transition. As I talked about before, right, there had been this kind of story told that we would get into public school and we would be influenced. And, I got to fifth grade. And as a fifth grader, I don't know that I really noticed much difference. These were other kids that seemed quite a bit like me. Um, we moved around a bit. My dad was getting another college degree because, as it turns out, the college he got his degree from was unaccredited, and that meant that it only counted inside the environment that we had grown up in. Um,
Oh,
so we were, I would not even say like strapped for cash. Like we had nothing, I think.
mm-hmm.
Um, and ultimately we ended up moving to Hawaii about a year later to go stay in my aunt's guest space. My mom's sister had left this environment at around the same time that we did, and had a house on Oahu in a town called Ewa Beach, and we stayed in her. They had like a bird atrium in her house. Yeah, we had it was kind of crazy. We had like 3 level bunk beds so that we could fit everybody in one room. Um, and yeah, and I started going to public school, started engaging with kids my own age. Um, that was in deep contrast, to my childhood.
Yeah.
Um, I put this in the notes, but one kind of element of growing up in that very faith based environment is that we would sit around, during family dinner, and my mom would hold up these huge like cards that had depictions of stories from the Bible. And when we left, all of that structure, left with it. We didn't have a routine anymore, and it was just like pretty tumultuous. I think.
Yeah, it's hard. Big family, right? Transition, just, and I mean, from the sounds of it, it's not just your parents grew up in this, right? And it's
Hmm.
like it's trying to find your path in a world that is totally different than what you ever really thought it was or knew it to be in some sense, right? Like,
Yeah. Oh, and still too, like still trying to hold on to those values, right?
yeah,
Like, you leave a community, but you don't want to leave your opinions and your beliefs behind. And so, my parents both, I think, really struggled with finding ways to continue reinforcing that faith on us. Um, my sister and I, around this time started taking a little bit more of a parental role, which is
mhm,
crazy thinking back on it because I was like 13.
yeah,
But I remember being the one to fill out the forms so that we could qualify for free reduced lunch, because my dad just like didn't have the time and energy for it. And we didn't have really anything to rely on consistently.
yeah,
We continued going to church. My dad, developed some relationships in a broader community than the one he'd grown up in, and my
mhm,
mom spent a lot of her time caring for us and trying to find community for herself.
yeah,
Us kids, you know, we were given a lot of freedom in that space. It was challenging, I think, to really apply any sort of like standard, I guess,
mhm. Yeah, and I mean that's so tough. You go from so much structure to then freedom, but what is that? And like you're just a what 10, 11, 12, 13 year old kid. Like,
Yeah.
how do you handle that transition? And then, not maybe culture shock's the wrong word, but like Hawaii, everybody, it sounds beautiful, right? And I'm sure in some essence it was, but you grew up in Wisconsin and Northern Illinois, and now you're trying to transition to public school for the first time. And it's just not only a different community, but like just a different part of the world,
Yeah.
right? And different culture.
Yeah,
So,
there was an element, going to public school in Hawaii too, of my ethnicity was part of the conversation. Because I was the only white kid in my
yeah,
class. I had one other friend who looked like me, and it's I just didn't have, I think, the tools to really cope with
hmm,
all that change. It I didn't bring that up, by the way, for any other reason than to say that yes, there was an element there as well of confusion and of
sure.
trying to find my place. Right. Um, it was really unstructured, and coming from such a structured environment,
Hmm.
we were kind of lost, I think. Um, not in the literal sense that we didn't know what was going on, but that
Hmm.
we didn't have foundation to rely on.
Hmm.
Um, as we'll talk about, next, like that led to some pretty rough times for me personally. But at the same time, reflecting back on it, I think that everybody was doing their best, to try to make that work, to try to make it make sense for us. Um, yeah,
Yeah. Well, I think that's obviously you've had a lot of time to think and reflect, but mature might be the wrong word, but I think it still is. It's a mature point of view to have, and isn't that all what everybody can just do? Just try their best, right? Like all we can do
Yeah,
is do our best in certain situations. Sometimes it ends up well, sometimes it doesn't, right? But Joe, I really appreciate this conversation. I know it might be tough to have this conversation, right? But I appreciate how open you're being. So
sure.
let's take a quick break, and like you said, when we come back, we'll move into your teenage years.
Cool.
Curious to learn more.
All right.